Now on to our feature presentation, creating end-user SharePoint solutions for performance and scalability. SharePoint provides a rich framework for creating robust, no-code solutions for end-user calibration and productivity. In this presentation, you will learn tried and proven methods for delivering out-of-the-box applications that are scalable, secure, and designed for optimal performance. You will also discover tips, tricks, tools, and techniques for measuring application performance and ensuring a quality end-user experience. Today, we are pleased to have back our expert presenter, the SharePoint cowboy, Mr. Eric Schupps. Eric Schupps is the founder and president of Binary Wave, a premier SharePoint consultancy headquartered in Irving, Texas, and director of Binary Wave Limited, based in Bristol, England. Eric has worked with SharePoint products and technology since 2001 as a consultant, administrator, architect, developer, and trainer. Eric has also authored numerous articles on SharePoint. He speaks at user groups and meetings and conferences around the world. He also publishes a popular SharePoint blog, www.sharepointcowboy.com. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you for the introduction. Much appreciated. So we've talked in the past about some performance optimization techniques that administrators can implement to improve the performance of their SharePoint environment. And for those of you who've heard me speak before, you've heard me talk in depth about optimization techniques for SharePoint development. But I wanted to talk today about some things that power users and site administrators can do using the out-of-the-box tool set in SharePoint to help improve application scalability in SharePoint. One of the most difficult things that
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
Do anything about the way the infrastructure was built or designed, so they're somewhat stuck with the capabilities that they've been given out of the box. But there are some things that you can do as a site administrator or a power user to help improve the performance of the applications, end-user applications that you're delivering to your customers. When I say applications, it really means anything within the context of SharePoint that you're using to deliver content to your users. So it could be just a web page that has some static display content maybe derived from a list, or a page viewer web part encapsulating content from another source. Or it could be a set of web parts and workflows and content sources that you put together, maybe a rather complex site hierarchy to collaborate and manage data in between users in a team or across departments. So applications in a SharePoint context are a pretty broad context. What I'm not speaking about today is custom applications that are developed by SharePoint developers and deployed into the environment. So everything we're going to discuss today centers around what can be done out of the box. As a starting point, most of the applications that we configure and create in SharePoint are based in one way or another around SharePoint lists, whether they're task lists, issues lists, workflow history lists, document libraries, picture libraries. Lists are really at the root of everything that SharePoint does. And anybody who's worked with it from an administrative perspective for a while has gotten used to some of the limitations that exist within the list framework. One of the most important things to realize when you're creating applications that are list-based is that the entire list structure, when it was created way back in the 2001 days, was then and still is optimized for the user interface and not necessarily for heavy data access. It's not uncommon for lists to have thousands or hundreds of thousands of items in them, but this does provide a significant or produce a significant performance drain on the system, because those lists, that list infrastructure was not really designed to handle that type of data in the way that, say, a transactional database system would do. And there are some significant limitations around the way that you view and present data in SharePoint lists. So I'm sure everybody here, if they've been around SharePoint for a while, has heard about the 2,000 item limit for SharePoint lists. Just to clarify, the 2,000 item limit is mostly related to the list view web parts that ship out of the box. It doesn't have anything to do with the list contents themselves. The recommended practical upper limit for items in a list is actually 5 million individual list items. The list can store a large amount of data, which of course is all put into the back-end SQL database, but getting to that data can be somewhat challenging with the built-in tools that you have available. And really it comes down to the fact that the list view web parts, which are in your web part gallery that you can add to any page within the site that the list resides in, and gives you access to the custom views and such that you've configured and allows you to do audience targeting. They employ some rather old code that's not really optimized for where we stand today with the browser technologies that we have in place these days. Some of it is held over from the early 2003 days, and they just don't use the most optimal queries to the database or techniques to render those to the end user. And that's been drastically improved in the 2010 version, and we're going to look at that when we look into our demos, and I'll talk a little bit about the differences. One of the things that is recommended in a lot of cases is the use of folders to manage the views of items in the list. It's important to understand that folders are simply a construct that allow you to manage the views. In other words, when you create a view for an object that has folders or to a specific folder, you're showing the contents of that folder. It doesn't have anything to do with the number of items that are in your list, so it doesn't limit the storage at all whatsoever. But it does provide you a capability to do some hierarchical views to make your data presentation a bit easier. So let's talk about what's happening with all this data so you can have a better understanding of why some of the applications that you're creating are so slow. All of the data in a site collection, which would be every single list, document library, picture library, every bit of content that you're storing on that data on that site is stored in a single table in the database called the user info table. The list constructs and the XML that defines what the columns are and all the views are stored in a different table. All the data goes into one specific table. And there's a lot of stuff that happens to that table. The list views have to query against it. Web parts have to call against that to get data. The search crawler crawls that table. The alerts, which is also a crawl mechanism, also acts against that table, as well as non-web part type content like publishing fields. So there's a lot of activity going on with the user info table in your SharePoint environment. And when you think of having a site collection that may have hundreds or even thousands of sites, be aware that all of that data within that one specific content database is going into one single user info table. The more items that you have in that table, the harder the queries have to work to pull data out of that table. Even if you're only looking at 100 items, if there are 100 million in that table, you have to query against, or SQL has to query against all those items just to get to the 100 that you're after. There are some things that SharePoint gives you out of the box to help make these data retrieval operations easier. If you're in a MOS environment, you have access to the content query web part. This is a more optimized way to query and capture content out of your lists in your SharePoint environment and present them to the users. So it gives you a way to craft your own queries that you can set in the interface, and also allows you to get content across sites within a specific site collection, so it's not bound to just one particular site that you're on, like the list view web parts are. It's got its own filtering and categorization in it, so you're not as dependent upon the list views as you are with a list view web part. And the best part of all is that the queries that the content query web part executes can be cached by the MOS object cache. We'll look at that about how that's configured in 2007. But there's another way that you can get to list data in a more optimal manner than what is provided out of the box, and that's by using the data view web parts, or the new terminology, I believe, is data form web parts. Same thing either way. Data view web parts give you a pretty rich authoring environment inside of SharePoint Designer to connect to external databases, anything you can create an ODBC connection to, SharePoint lists directly, or the entire set of SharePoint web services, which has a number of list retrieval methods inside of it. The best part about the data view web parts is that they render the items using XML and XSL, so they're not as query bound and don't use the same legacy code base as the list view web parts do. And they have some customizable presentation templates that you can use. So there's different ways you can set the data to appear that's all point and click within SharePoint Designer. You can do cross-site data connections. So if you're trying to pull data from one site collection to another, which is a challenge using any of the out-of-the-box web parts, data view web parts allow you to create connections across site collections, which is really handy. And because of the way they execute their queries, it's actually running object model code